What's up, guys, and welcome back to Dark Souls 2 with the new Crown of the Old Iron King DLC weapons overview. We got 12 of these to go through, so let's get right to it. First up is going to be the Umbral Dagger. It requires 12 strength, 20 dexterity, does a base physical damage of 53, and it's a dagger, so it gets a counter of 130. Add to that it has an S scaling in dexterity, and you have a backstabbing parry monster. This weapon weighs 2 units, upgrades along the Twinkling Titanite path. The moveset itself is fairly standard, as you'll see. Nothing too crazy about it, except for maybe the two-handed rolling attack, which is kind of a unique little slash move it has. Other than that, this weapon's fairly basic. Up next we have the second dagger in the DLC, which is the Blue Dagger. It requires 6 strength and 14 dexterity. It does a base physical damage of 76 and has 120 counter strength. It scales E with strength and C with dexterity, and weighing just 0.5 units. It also upgrades along the Twinkling Titanite path, and has a special ability that it slightly increases spell power when it's equipped in the offhand of your catalyst or whatever. Other than that, the moveset itself is once again very basic for a dagger. Next on the list is the Ashen Warrior Sword, which requires 10 strength and 18 dexterity to wield. At its core, it does 138 physical damage, with the added effect of 67 bleed. It scales with C in both strength and dexterity, and comes in at a modest 3 units of weight. It upgrades along the standard Titanite path, and as you can see, it's more of a slashing and thrusting weapon. All the light attacks are slashes, and all the heavy attacks and rolls and stuff like that all become a thrusting attack. We have the Pilgrim's Spontoon next, which requires 11 strength, 12 dexterity, and 30 in both intelligence and faith. This has a base damage of 120 magic and 120 dark. It scales with a C in both magic and dark. Weighing 3.5 units, this upgrades on the standard Titanite path, and the strong attacks act like a catalyst. This will allow you to cast sorceries and any hex that does require a staff. This being a spear weapon, it can also do the shield poke. Up next is the Possessed Armor Greatbow, which has a strength requirement of 25 and a dexterity requirement of 40. At its base damage, it does 153 physical and 40 dark. It has a D scaling in strength, a B scaling in dexterity, and a C scaling in dark. This bow weighs 10 units and upgrades on the standard Titanite path. And in all my testing, there wasn't really anything special about it. Just a nice little great bow for you and your fashion souls. The second of the Possessed Armor equipment we have is the Possessed Armor Sword. This requires 20 strength and 13 dexterity. It has a base physical damage of 130 with 67 fire damage added to that. It scales with an E in both strength and dexterity, and also has a C scaling with fire. This weapon weighs 5 units and upgrades on the standard Titanite path. One notice about the moveset of this is that the heavy attacks mimic that of an axe, where the light attacks are more sword-like. Another thing of note of this weapon is the two-handed parry is actually a fire buff that goes on your weapon for 30 seconds, increasing its fire damage. Moving along, we have one of the more interesting weapons in the DLC, the Majestic Greatsword. This sword has a pretty hefty stat requirement of 25 strength, 25 dexterity, 20 intelligence, and 20 faith. It scales with a C in strength and a D in dexterity. Coming in at a fairly hefty 9 units, this upgrades on the Twinkling Titanite path. We're going to do this one a little bit differently. First I'm going to show you the standard moveset in the right hand, but for those of you that read the description, there's something a little interesting there about all the swordsmen being left-handed. Now we're going to put the sword in our left hand and see quite a difference in the moveset. Our heavy attack seemed a little acrobatic, didn't it? Those of you that played Dark Souls 1 might be seeing something a little familiar here. As we two-hand this, we're going to see a moveset similar to that of Artorias of the Abyss. That's right, the Abyss Greatsword moveset is in the left hand of this sword. Now we're going to see probably the coolest move. That's right, Artorias' Flip. Also interesting enough, when we dual wield this, we get another move as well. Pretty standard here, but when we hit the parry button in the dual wield, yeah. Very nice sword. Very nice addition to the game. Now for the Smelter Hammer. The Smelter Hammer requires an insane 70 strength to wield, along with 6 dexterity. At its base, it does 384 physical damage and scales a B in strength. But I don't think it'll be a problem for people using it because you'll have 70 of them. It weighs a ton at 35 units and upgrades on the standard Titanite path. This sword basically has the moves of a Great Hammer, with nothing too crazy until we get into the two-handed stuff. You'll have to excuse me because I do not meet the stat requirements to wield this sword with one hand. But when we get into the two hands, that won't be a problem. And now we're about to see probably the most absurd move in the game. Yeah. A whirlwind of doom followed by a club throw. Up next we move on to the boss weapons. This is the Chime of Screams, made by Weaponsmith Ornifex, with the Soul of Nadalia and 20,000 souls. It requires 26 faith to use, and has a base damage of 158 in lightning and 158 in dark. It also has B scaling in both of those stats, making it useful for faith builds or hexes. This weighs 0.5 units and upgrades on the Petrified Dragon Bone path. One thing to note is this has a very slow cast speed of 25, but it also increases your faith by 6, so it's a big trade-off there. Now we move on to the Fume Sword, also made by Weaponsmith Ornifex for the Soul of the Fume Knight and 8,000 souls. This requires 15 strength and 22 dexterity. It has a base physical damage of 107 and dark damage of 47. It scales in C in both dexterity and dark and weighs 3 units. This upgrades on the Petrified Dragon Bone path as well. As you can see, the sword actually doesn't have much special with it. It's a slashing and thrusting sword and mimics the moveset of many other ones. And now to the more interesting Fume Knight Boss Soul upgrade. We have the Fume Knight Ultra Greatsword, also made by Weaponsmith Ornifex for the Soul of the Fume Knight and 25,000 souls. Its stat requirements are considerably higher at 40 strength and 30 dex, and has a base physical damage of 307. It also has an S scaling in strength and a D scaling in dexterity. It weighs a fairly big 28 units and upgrades on the Petrified Dragon Bone path. As you can see by the moveset, the heavy attack is a very unique counter-style move that blocks for an instant and then gives a smash just after that. The two-handed parry also has the similar effect, so it's a quick block and then a counterattack. Could make for some very interesting PvP, this weapon. The last of the new weapons is the Bewitched Elan Sword. This is also made by Weaponsmith Ornifex for the Soul of Sir Elan and 18,000 souls. Its strength requirement is 22 and dexterity 30. It has a base physical damage of 150 and 53 bleed add-on to that. It scales A in dexterity and weighs 9 units. And as with all boss weapons, it upgrades on the Petrified Dragon Bone path. The moveset is fairly interesting, mostly Katana style, but it has a very interesting two-handed parry, where instead of a parry, it's actually a buff. The two-handed parry will inflict some self-harm, but buff your sword for 30 seconds, giving you a bit of extra damage. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.